The Tempest is a play by William Shakespeare, believed to have been written in 1610–11, and thought by many critics to be the last play that Shakespeare wrote alone. It is set on a remote island, where the sorcerer Prospero, rightful Duke of Milan, plots to restore his daughter Miranda to her rightful place using illusion and skillful manipulation. He conjures up a storm, the eponymous Tempest, to lure his usurping brother Antonio and the complicit King Alonso of Naples to the island. There, his machinations bring about the revelation of Antonio's lowly nature, the redemption of the king, and the marriage of Miranda to Alonso's son, Ferdinand. There is no obvious single source for the plot of The Tempest, but researchers have seen parallels in Erasmus's Naufragium, Peter Martyr's De Orbe Novo, and eyewitness reports by William Strachey and Sylvester Jourdain of the real-life shipwreck of the Sea Venture on the islands of Bermuda, and the subsequent conflict between Sir Thomas Gates and Sir George Somers. In addition, one of Gonzalo's speeches is derived from Montaigne's essay of the Cannibalist, and much of Prospero's renunciative speech is taken word for word from a speech by Medea in Ovid's poem Metamorphoses. The Masque in Act 4 may have been a later addition, possibly in honor of the wedding of Princess Elizabeth and Frederick V in 1613. The play was first published in the First Folio of 1623. The story draws heavily on the tradition of the Romance, and it was influenced by tragicomedy, the courtly masque and perhaps the commedia dell'arte. It differs from Shakespeare's other plays in its observation of a stricter, more organized neoclassical style. Critics see The Tempest as explicitly concerned with its own nature as a play, frequently drawing links between Prospero's art and theatrical illusion, and early critics saw Prospero as a representation of Shakespeare, and his renunciation of magic as signaling Shakespeare's farewell to the stage. The play portrays Prospero as a rational, and not an occultist, magician by providing a contrast to him in Sycorax. Her magic is frequently described as destructive and terrible, where Prospero's is said to be wondrous and beautiful. Beginning in about 1950, with the publication of Psychology of Colonization by Octave Manoni, The Tempest was viewed more and more through the lens of post-colonial theory, exemplified in adaptations like Aimé Écoute-Césare's Un Tempest in Haiti, and there is even a scholarly journal on post-colonial criticism named after Caliban. The Tempest did not attract a significant amount of attention before the ban on the performance of plays in 1642, and only attained popularity after the Restoration, and then only in adapted versions. In the mid-19th century, theatre productions began to reinstate the original Shakespearean text, and in the 20th century, critics and scholars undertook a significant reappraisal of the play's value, to the extent that it is now considered to be one of Shakespeare's greatest works. It has been adapted numerous times in a variety of styles and formats. In music, at least 46 operas by composers such as Fremantle Halevi, Zdeněk Fibič and Thomas Addis, orchestral works by Tchaikovsky, Arthur Sullivan and Arthur Honegger, and songs by such diverse artists as Ralph Vaughan Williams, Michael Nyman, and Pete Seeger. In literature, Percy Bysshe Shelley's poem With the Guitar, to Jane and W. H. Auden's The Sea and the Mirror, novels by Aimé Écoute-Césare and The Diviners by Margaret Lawrence, in paintings by William Hogarth, Henry Fuseli, and John Everett Milius, and on screen, ranging through a hand-tinted version of Herbert Beerbohm Tree's 1905 stage performance, the science fiction film Forbidden Planet in 1956, Peter Greenaway's 1991 Prospero's books featuring John Gielgud as Prospero, to Julie Taymor's 2010 film version which changed Prospero to Prospera, and Desmond Enough's 2010 Stratford Shakespeare Festival production which starred Christopher Plummer. Characters. Plot. The magician, Prospero, rightful Duke of Milan, and his daughter, Miranda, have been stranded for 12 years on an island after Prospero's jealous brother Antonio deposed him and set him adrift with the 3-year-old. Miranda. Gonzalo, Alonso's counselor, had secretly supplied the boat with some food, fresh water, rich garments, linens, stuffs and necessaries, and volumes that Prospero prizes. Possessing magic powers due to his great learning, Prospero is reluctantly served by a spirit, Ariel, whom Prospero had rescued from a tree in which he had been trapped by the cruel witch Sycorax, after he had refused to obey her. Prospero maintains Ariel's loyalty by repeatedly promising to release the airy spirit from servitude. Sycorax had been exiled from Algiers to the island for wreaking havoc with her magic, and had died before Prospero's arrival and without releasing Ariel. Sycorax's son, Caliban, a deformed monster and the only non-spiritual inhabitant before the arrival of Prospero, was initially adopted and raised by him. He taught Prospero how to survive on the island, while Prospero and Miranda taught Caliban religion and their own language. In slavery, Caliban has come to view Prospero as a usurper and has grown to resent him and his daughter. Prospero and Miranda in turn view Caliban with disappointment, contempt and disgust. Prospero only performs one act of magic himself directly on stage. He disarms Ferdinand, causing his nerves to become in their infancy again. The rest of his magic is through controlling spirits, which is how magicians of the time were believed to operate. Prospero, having divined that his brother Antonio is on a nearby ship, has raised a tempest that causes the passengers to believe they are shipwrecked and marooned. Also on the ship are Antonio's friend and fellow conspirator, King Alonso of Naples, Alonso's brother and son, and Alonso's trusted counselor, Gonzalo. All these passengers are returning from the wedding of Alonso's daughter Claribel and the King of Tunis. Prospero contrives to separate the shipwreck survivors into several groups by his spells, and so Alonso and Ferdinand are separated, each believing the other to be dead. 3 plots then alternate through the play. In 1, Caliban falls in with Stefano and Trinculo, 2 drunkards, believing Stefano to be a brave god who bears celestial liquor. They attempt to raise a coup against Prospero, which ultimately fails. In another, Prospero works to encourage a romantic relationship between Ferdinand and Miranda. The two fall immediately in love, but Prospero worries that too light winning make the prize light, and compels Ferdinand to become his servant, pretending that he regards him as a spy. In the third subplot, Antonio and Sebastian conspire to kill Alonso and Gonzalo so that Sebastian can become king. Ariel thwarts them at Prospero's command. Ariel appears to the 3 men of sin as a harpy, reprimanding them for the betrayal of Prospero. Prospero, who has witnessed this, leaves to visit Ferdinand and Miranda. The 3 guilty nobles run off, distracted and in a frenzy, and Gonzalo and the attendant lords chase after to prevent them from doing what this ecstasy may now provoke them to. Prospero then explains that he tested Ferdinand and betrothed a willing Miranda to him. He then asks Ariel to bring some other spirits and create a mask to entertain the young couple. These spirits present a blessing by Iris, Ceres, and Juno, followed by dancing. Prospero suddenly remembers the plot against his life, dismisses the spirits and Miranda and Ferdinand, and sets a trap for Caliban, Trinculo, and Stefano. They are chased off stage by goblins in the shape of hounds. Prospero Prospero, all his enemies in his power, discovers that Ariel would pity them if he were human, and decides to forgive the people who tried to kill him. He tells Ariel to fetch the nobles while he breaks his charms. In the conclusion, all the main characters have brought together before Prospero, who forgives Alonso, Antonio and Sebastian. Ariel is charged to prepare the proper sailing weather to guide the king's ship back to the royal fleet and then to Naples, where Ferdinand and Miranda will be married. After discharging this task, Ariel will finally be free. Prospero pardons Caliban, who is sent to prepare Prospero's cell, to which Alonso and his party are invited for a final night before the departure. Prospero indicates that he intends to entertain them with the story of his life on the island. Prospero has resolved to break and bury his magic staff, and drown his book of magic, and in his epilogue, shorn of his magic powers, he invites the audience to set him free from the island with their applause. Text. The Tempest presents relatively few textual problems in comparison with many of Shakespeare's other plays. First published in the First Folio in December 1623, the play is first in the volume, leading the section of comedies. The play has more stage directions than any of Shakespeare's other plays, though they appear to have been written for readers instead of actors. Scholars infer from this that the editors of the volume, John Hemmings and Henry Condell, included the directions to aid readers, and they were not necessarily Shakespeare's. Scholars have also wondered about the mask in Act 4, which some think was an interpolated afterthought, possibly added for the wedding of Princess Elizabeth and Frederick V in 1613. However, other scholars see this as unlikely, arguing that taking the mask out of the play creates more problems than it solves. Themes and motifs. The theatre. The Tempest is explicitly concerned with its own nature as a play, frequently drawing links between Prospero's art and theatrical allusion. The shipwreck was a spectacle that Ariel performed, while Antonio and Sebastian are cast in a troupe to act. Prospero may even refer to the Globe Theatre when he describes the whole world as an illusion. The great globe shall dissolve. Like this insubstantial pageant, Ariel frequently disguises himself as figures from classical mythology, for example a nymph, a harpy, and Ceres, acting as the latter in a mask and anti-mask that Prospero creates. Early critics, such as Thomas Campbell in 1838, saw this constant allusion to theatre as an indication that Prospero was meant to represent Shakespeare, the character's renunciation of magic, thus signaling Shakespeare's farewell to the stage. This theory persists among later critics, and remains solidly within the critical canon. Curious, however, since it can then be easily noted even to the lay person that this technique, comparison with the theatre, is one Shakespeare employed often, and in many, if not all, of his writings. Among the many examples of these two noteworthy ones, "All the world's a stage, and all of us merely players," is a phrase that begins the monologue from Shakespeare's As You Like It, and is spoken by the melancholy Jack in Scene 7 of Act 2. Another example is found during the final act of Macbeth, when the title character delivers his monologue that has come to be known as the Tomorrow speech. In it, toward the end of this monologue, Macbeth ruminates on the futility of existence when declaring that is like a poor player, one who struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. Shakespeare seems to be likening a hopeful performer's 15 minutes of fame and subsequent decline into obscurity with how fleeting and how utterly fast one's life goes by, proceeding at such a fast pace as to make both life and the accomplishments therein seem not only irrelevant and relatively trivial, but momentary as well. It would, then, seem as though the actual value in making such references would not be so the writer could compare his or her own writing with itself, or even with himself, or even to compare the stage play with itself, but would be, rather, to notice the similarities that life in itself has to the theatre in order to help people to compare the likeness of the play with life as a whole, with all its antimametic likenesses and parallels and dramas contained therein. After all, numerous literary figures have noted that life imitates art. Magic was a controversial subject in Shakespeare's day. In Italy in 1600, Giordano Bruno, known for his occult interests, was burnt at the stake for heresy. Outside the Catholic world, in Protestant England where Shakespeare wrote The Tempest, magic was also taboo. Not all magic, however, was considered evil. Several thinkers took a more rational approach to the study of the supernatural, with the determination to discover the workings of unusual phenomena. The German Henricus Cornelius Agrippa was one such thinker, who published in De Occulta Philosophia his observations of divine magic. Agrippa's work influenced Dr. John Dee, an Englishman and student of supernatural phenomena. When King James took the throne, Dee found himself under attack for his beliefs, but was able to defend himself successfully by explaining the divine nature of his profession. However, he died in disgrace in 1608. Shakespeare is also careful to make the distinction that Prospero presents himself as a rational, and not an occultist, magician. He does this by providing a contrast to him in Sycorax. Sycorax is said to have worshipped the devil and been full of earthy and abhorred commands. She was unable to control Ariel, who was too delicate for such dark tasks. Prospero's rational goodness enables him to control Ariel where Sycorax can only trap him in a tree. Sycorax's magic is frequently described as destructive and terrible, where Prospero's is said to be wondrous and beautiful. Prospero seeks to set things right in his world through his magic, and once that is done, he renounces it, setting Ariel free. The soul. The Tempest can be interpreted as Shakespeare's last treatise on the human soul, in particular the Renaissance conception of the tripartite soul divided into vegetative, sensitive, and rational spheres, as described in Plato's tripartite theory of soul and Christian philosophy. This was later also described in Sigmund Freud's id, ego and superego, which was first linked to the Tempest in the 1956 screenplay for Forbidden Planet by Cyril Hume, Irving Bloch, and Alan Adler. The film presents Caliban reinterpreted as the monster from the id, although the theory is dismissed as obsolete in that imagined future, and was also dismissed by James E. Phillips in 1964. Prospero is exiled to an island with a symbol of his baser, vegetative nature, Caliban, and his higher, sensitive or supernatural side, Ariel. Some productions have seen the same actor play all three roles, making them symbols of the conflict within a fully actualized or awakened Prospero, that between crude selfish physicality and a higher, mystical side. According to this theory, one of many, for as long as Prospero is battling with these qualities and lost in books, he is banished from Milan. As the play finds its conclusion, he is both able to accept his base, brutal nature while letting go of his connection with higher, powerful forces. Abandoning magic and acknowledging the brutal potential of his nature, he is allowed to return to his rightful place as Duke, subject to agreement from the audience, as you from crimes would pardoned be. Let your indulgence set me free. Criticism and interpretation. Genre. The story draws heavily on the tradition of the romance, a fictitious narrative set far away from ordinary life. Romances were typically based around themes such as the supernatural, wandering, exploration and discovery. They were often set in coastal regions, and typically featured exotic, fantastical locations and themes of transgression and redemption, loss and retrieval, exile and reunion. As a result, while The Tempest was originally listed as a comedy in the first folio of Shakespeare's plays, subsequent editors have chosen to give it the more specific label of Shakespearean romance. Like the other romances, the play was influenced by the then new genre of tragicomedy, introduced by John Fletcher in the first decade of the 17th century and developed in the Beaumont and Fletcher collaborations, as well as by the explosion of development of the courtly mask form by such as Ben Jonson and Inigo Jones at the same time. Dramatic structure. The Tempest differs from Shakespeare's other plays in its observation of a stricter, more organized neoclassical style. The clearest indication of this is Shakespeare's respect for the three unities in the play, the unities of time, place, and action. Shakespeare's other plays rarely respected the three unities, taking place in separate locations miles apart and over several days or even years. The play's events unfold in real time before the audience, Prospero even declaring in the last act that everything has happened in more or less 3 hours. All action is unified into one basic plot, Prospero's struggle to regain his dukedom. It is also confined to one place, a fictional island, which many scholars agree is meant to be located in the Mediterranean Sea. Another reading suggests that it takes place in the New World, as some parts read like records of English and Spanish conquest in the Americas. Still others argue that the island can represent any land that has been colonized. Post-colonial. In Shakespeare's day, much of the world was still being colonized by European merchants and settlers, and stories were coming back from the Americas, with myths about the cannibals of the Caribbean, faraway Edens, and distant tropical utopias. With the character Caliban, Shakespeare may be offering an in-depth discussion into the morality of colonialism. Different views of this are found in the play, with examples including Gonzalo's Utopia, Prospero's enslavement of Caliban, and Caliban's subsequent resentment. Caliban is also shown as one of the most natural characters in the play, being very much in touch with the natural world. There is evidence that Shakespeare drew on Montaigne's essay of Cannibals, which discusses the values of societies insulated from European influences, while writing The Tempest. Beginning in about 1950, with the publication of Psychology of Colonization by Octave Manoni, The Tempest was viewed more and more through the lens of post-colonial theory. This new way of looking at the text explored the effect of the colonizer on the colonized. Though Ariel is often overlooked in these debates in favor of the more intriguing Caliban, he is nonetheless an essential component of them. The French writer Aimé Écoute-Sater, in his play Une Tempête, sets the Tempest in Haiti, portraying Ariel as a mulatto who, unlike the more rebellious Caliban, feels that negotiation and partnership is the way to freedom from the colonizers. Fernandez Ritamar sets his version of the play in Cuba, and portrays Ariel as a wealthy Cuban who also must choose between rebellion and negotiation. Although scholars have suggested that his dialogue with Caliban in Act 2, Scene 1, contains hints of a future alliance between the two when Prospero leaves, Ariel is generally viewed by scholars as the good servant, in comparison with the conniving Caliban, a view which Shakespeare's audience may well have shared. Ariel is used by some post-colonial writers as a symbol of their efforts to overcome the effects of colonization on the culture. For example, Michelle Cliff, a Jamaican author, has said that she tries to combine Caliban and Ariel within herself to create a way of writing that represents her culture better. Such use of Ariel in post-colonial thought is far from uncommon. The Spirit is even the namesake of a scholarly journal covering post-colonial criticism.